The war had a smell. It was not the clean scent of pine forests or the sharp bite of winter air. It was copper and sweat, leather and fear, the particular stench of men who knew they might not see another dawn. Commander Dorian Ashcroft stood in the center of his war tent, hands braced against a table carved from ancient oak, studying the map that might as well have been a prophecy of death. Red markers, 63 of them, each one a position his scouts had died to confirm, each one a frostborn warrior who wanted his blood, his throne, his very breath stolen from his lungs. The tent flap snapped open. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the particular tension that preceded bad news. Dorian did not look up. He had learned long ago that bad news arrived whether you acknowledged it or not. Commander Ragnar Blackthorn entered with the measured stride of a man who had seen 5 wars and expected to see 5 more. His face was a roadmap of violence. 3 scars crossed his left cheek. A 4th bisected his eyebrow. His eyes were the pale gray of winter sky before snow, and they held the kind of cold calculation that Dorian had once admired, had learned from, had trusted. "We lost the eastern ridge." Ragnar's voice was granite scraped over steel. "Frostborn took it 2 hours before dawn. 17 of our men, none survived." Dorian's jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped once, twice, then went still. 17 men, 17 families who would receive folded uniforms and empty condolences. 17 reasons this war needed to end. "The scout, the one we captured yesterday, did he talk before he died?" Ragnar moved to the opposite side of the table. Even in stillness, he radiated the coiled energy of a predator. "He talked, said their alpha wants more than territory. He wants blood debt, specifically yours." Blood debt. The words hung in the air like a curse. Under wolf law, blood debt was absolute. A life for a life, a sin of the father visited upon the son. Dorian had spent 2 months trying to understand why Alpha Bjorn Frostborn had brought 300 warriors to his border. Now he knew. "My father." The accusation in those 2 words could have cut stone. What did Aldrich do? 30 years ago, during the Treaty of Winterhold, your father met with Alpha Eric Frostborn. Ragnar's finger traced a line on the map, far north, where the territories bled into frozen wasteland. Peace negotiations over border disputes. Eric died during those talks. Poisoned, they said. Your father was the only other person in the room. Dorian felt something cold settle into his chest. His father had been many things. A hard man, a king who ruled with iron will and little mercy. But a murderer during peace talks? That was the act of a coward, and whatever else Aldrich Ashcroft had been, he had not been a coward. "And Bjorn believes my father killed his grandfather." Ragnar met his gaze. "Bjorn knows it. The Frostborn have carried this grudge for 3 decades. Now that Aldrich is dead and you wear the crown, the debt transfers. By wolf law, you owe them your life." Dorian straightened. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders in the way of those who had spent their youth training for war. At 32, he was young for a king, but old for a warrior. The scars on his hands and the set of his jaw told the story of a man who had been forged in violence and tempered in responsibility. "I will not give them my life for a crime I did not commit." "Then you give them war." Ragnar's voice held no judgment, only fact. "And we are already 2 months into that war, losing ground, losing men. The Frostborn are fresh. We are exhausted. Winter comes in 6 weeks. If we are still fighting when the snow arrives, half our army will freeze before they can bleed." The tent fell silent. Outside, Dorian could hear the sounds of an army preparing for another day of dying, the ring of steel on whetstone, the low murmur of men sharing what might be their last jokes, the stamp of horses being readied for riders who might not return to unsaddle them. "What would you have me do, old friend?" Ragnar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man delivering a verdict. "End it, one way or another. Challenge Bjorn to single combat, king against Alpha. Let the gods decide who owes the debt. And if I lose? Then the war ends, and your people survive under new rule. If you win, the Frostborn must accept your victory, and the debt is paid. Either way, no more boys die for a 30-year-old crime." Dorian turned away from the table, moved to the tent's entrance, pulled back the heavy canvas. Dawn was breaking over the war camp. Smoke rose from 100 cook fires. Men in various states of exhaustion moved through the mud and blood-soaked earth. This was his responsibility. these lives, these deaths, this crushing weight of a crown he had not asked for but could not refuse. I will consider it. Summon the War Council for midday. I want Warden Thorn, Lady Silvara, and Elder Cassius. We plan our next move together." Ragnar inclined his head, the barest acknowledgement. As he turned to leave, Dorian spoke again. "And Ragnar, find out everything there is to know about what happened at Winterhold 30 years ago. If my father truly did poison Eric Frostborn during peace talks, I need to know. I need to understand what kind of man I am supposed to be dying for." The old commander paused at the tent flap. "You already know what kind of man he was. The question is what kind of man you will be." Then he was gone, leaving Dorian alone with his maps and his dead, and the particular loneliness of command. The morning stretched into a series of small brutalities, a report of supplies running low, a message from the capital requesting updates he did not have time to provide. A young soldier, barely 18, carried into the medical tent with a frostborn arrow through his lung. Dorian visited that tent, as he did every morning, looked into the eyes of men who might not survive to see sunset, learned their names, carried the weight of their service like stones in his chest. Lady Silvara found him there, in the dim canvas space that smelled of blood and healing herbs. She was 42, with the kind of beauty that came not from youth, but from competence. Her hands, stained with the evidence of her work, moved with practiced efficiency as she checked bandages and adjusted poultices. "He will live." Her voice was low, meant only for Dorian. The arrow missed the lung by half an inch. Lucky. Dorian looked down at the boy. Too young to be here, too young to carry a sword that heavy, to know the particular fear that came before a charge. Lucky, is that what we call it now? Silvara met his gaze. Her eyes were dark, knowing. "What would you call it, my king?" "A waste." He turned away, moved toward the tent's exit. All of this, a waste. He did not see her expression shift, did not hear the whisper she offered to his retreating back. Not all of it, not yet. The War Council convened at midday in the command tent. The table that held the map of their dying was surrounded by 4 people who held Dorian's fragile trust. Ragnar stood to the right, arms crossed, face impassive. He had been Aldrich's war master before Dorian's, had taught a young prince how to hold a sword, how to kill without hesitation, how to make the hard choices that kept a kingdom standing. Now he served the son with the same cold efficiency he had served the father. Warden Thorn stood opposite. At 48, he was responsible for the logistics that kept an army fed, armed, and functional. His face held the particular weariness of a man who spent his days calculating how many men could die before the numbers stopped making sense. Lady Silvara had cleaned the blood from her hands, but the scent of the medical tent still clung to her. She commanded the healer corps, 36 men and women who patched the broken bodies that war produced with the regularity of a machine. Elder Cassius was the oldest among them at 68, keeper of laws, historian, the walking memory of a kingdom that had seen too much bloodshed. His beard was white, his eyes sharp, his voice the kind that commanded attention through pure force of accumulated wisdom. Dorian stood at the head of the table, both hands flat against the scarred wood. "We have a choice to make. Continue this war until winter kills us all, or end it now on terms that may cost me everything." He explained what Ragnar had told him. The blood debt, the accusation that stretched back 3 decades, the possibility of trial by combat, king against alpha, the old way of settling disputes that laws and politics could not touch. Elder Cassius spoke first. "If Aldrich truly killed Eric Frostborn during peace talks, then by our own laws, the blood debt is valid. You would be honor-bound to pay it." Dorian's hands curled into fists. "I will not die for my father's sins." "Then you must prove his innocence." Cassius leaned forward, his age-spotted hands folding together. "Or you must win a fight against an alpha who has spent 30 years preparing for revenge. Neither path is certain." Warden Thorn cleared his throat. "There is a third option. We could retreat, pull back to the capital, fortify, wait out the winter. The Frostborn cannot sustain a siege through the frozen months. Come spring, we negotiate from a position of strength." Ragnar's voice cut through like a blade. "Retreat is surrender wearing a different name. The moment we show our backs, every pack from here to the southern coast will smell weakness. We will spend the next decade putting down challenges to the throne. So we fight." Silvara's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. We continue sending boys to die for a crime that may or may not have happened 30 years before any of them were born." The tent fell silent. Each person at that table understood the impossible mathematics of war, the calculations that turned men into numbers, lives into strategic resources, futures into acceptable losses. Dorian was about to speak when the sound of shouting erupted from outside, not the organized noise of drills or orders, but the chaotic sound of alarm, of something wrong. He was moving before conscious thought, hand on the long knife at his belt, pushing through the tent flap into cold afternoon air. The war camp was in motion, soldiers running toward the eastern perimeter, officers shouting for order, the particular electricity that preceded violence crackling through the air like static before a storm. A cluster of guards stood at the camp's edge, weapons drawn, surrounding something. Someone. As Dorian approached, they parted, their faces showing confusion, wariness, and something that might have been fear. In the center of that circle stood a woman. She was small, perhaps 5.5 feet tall, and she looked like she had walked through the wars of 3 lifetimes to get here. Her clothes were torn, mud-caked, the kind of damage that spoke of hard travel through unforgiving terrain. Her dark hair was matted, tangled with leaves and dirt. Her face was pale beneath the grime, exhausted in a way that went bone deep. But her eyes were the color of amber lit from within, the color of autumn leaves touched by late sun, the color of old honey and ancient promises. And they were looking directly at Dorian with an intensity that struck him like a physical blow. One of the guards stepped forward, his voice rough. "My king, we found her trying to enter the camp. She claims she is not Frostborn, claims she has come to see you. We think she is a spy." Dorian moved closer. The woman did not flinch, did not look away. There was something in her face, in the set of her jaw, that spoke of a core of steel wrapped in exhausted flesh. "Who are you?" His voice was the one he used for interrogations. Flat, empty of everything except the demand for truth. The woman lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, but clear. "My name is Alara Thornwick. I am the daughter of Marin Thornwick and King Aldrich Ashcroft. I am your sister, and you are dying." The world seemed to stop. The sounds of the camp faded to a distant roar. Dorian was aware of Ragnar appearing at his shoulder, of the guards tightening their grips on their weapons, of the impossible words hanging in the air like smoke. "Sister." The word felt foreign in his mouth. "I have no sister." Alara Thornwick's expression did not change. "You do. Your father had a relationship with my mother 25 years ago. I am the result. And before you call me a liar or a spy or a convenient invention of your enemies, I can prove it." She reached for the sleeve of her torn tunic, began to push it up her forearm. The guards tensed, weapons rising, but Dorian held up one hand. "Wait." The sleeve came up, revealing pale skin marked with weeks of hard travel. And there, on her inner forearm, just below the crook of her elbow, was a mark. It was not a tattoo, not a brand, not something applied to skin, but rather something born into it. A silver crescent moon, delicate as spider silk, cradled within the curve of a single star. Even in the cold afternoon light, it seemed to glow with a faint luminescence, as though lit from beneath the skin. Dorian knew that mark. He bore an identical one on his own arm, hidden beneath leather and cloth. It was the mark of the Ashcroft bloodline, the sign of those descended from the first wolves who had walked beneath the moon goddess's light. It could not be forged, could not be faked. It simply was, or it was not. His world tilted, righted itself, tilted again. This woman, this exhausted stranger covered in the evidence of desperate travel, bore the proof of her claim written in silver on her skin. Ragnar's voice came from beside him, low and dangerous. "It is a trick, Frostborn magic, glamour to create the appearance of the mark. They sent her to destabilize you." Alara turned those amber eyes on the commander. "I walked 3 weeks through territory controlled by wolves who would kill me on sight. I slept in ditches and ate bark when I could find nothing else. I came here because my mother made me promise, with her last breath, that I would find my brother, that I would help him survive what is killing him." Dorian found his voice. "What are you talking about?" The woman swayed on her feet, exhaustion finally catching up to the adrenaline that had carried her this far. "I can feel it, like fire eating you from the inside, the rage, the constant war with something that is not quite you, but is becoming more of you every day. It is a curse in your blood, and it is getting worse. The stress of this war is feeding it. If it continues, it will consume you entirely. Silence. The kind of silence that came when truth walked into a room uninvited and demanded to be acknowledged. Because she was right. Dorian had not told anyone, not even Ragnar, about the blackouts. The moments where he came back to himself covered in blood with no memory of what he had done. The rage that was becoming harder and harder to control. The sense that something fundamental inside him was breaking. How do you know this? His voice was barely above a whisper. Alara's eyes closed. When they opened again, they seemed to glow brighter, that amber light intensifying. Because I can sense it. I do not know how. I do not know why. But I have been able to feel your pain, your fury, your exhaustion for the last 200 miles. It gets stronger the closer I come, and right now, standing here, I can feel your heart trying to beat its way out of your chest. I can feel your wolf clawing at the inside of your skin. I can feel you fighting a war inside yourself that is harder than any battle you have fought on this field. Dorian took a step back. It felt like this woman had reached inside his chest and pulled out his most carefully guarded secret. The thing he could not show to his men, his commanders, his kingdom. The fact that he was losing control. That the crown was becoming too heavy and the beast too strong, and the line between king and monster was blurring to nothing. Take her. His voice was rough, strained. Put her in the command tent. Guard her. Do not let her speak to anyone. I will question her myself. My king. Ragnar's hand was on his arm, gripped tight. This is foolish. She should be interrogated by someone who can be objective. She has already affected you. Dorian pulled his arm free. The motion was sharper than intended. Do as I say. He turned and walked away, not toward his own tent, but toward the edge of camp, toward the tree line where he could be alone with the impossible thing that had just walked into his war. Behind him, he heard the sounds of Alara being led away, heard Ragnar giving orders in a voice that suggested this conversation was far from over. But all Dorian could think about were those amber eyes and the terrible possibility that this stranger knew him better after one meeting than people who had stood beside him for years. Sister. The word echoed in his mind. Daughter of Aldrich, bearer of the mark, and something else. Something she had not said, but he had felt the moment their eyes met. A pull, deep in his chest. A recognition that bypassed thought and spoke directly to the part of him that was not quite human. The wolf inside him, the beast he spent every waking hour controlling, had lifted its head at the sight of her, had seen something, had known something. And that terrified him more than any Frostborn army ever could. The sun was setting when Dorian finally returned to camp. The sky was bruised purple and red, the colors of old wounds, the promise of more violence to come. He had walked the perimeter twice, had checked on sentries, had done anything except return to the command tent where a woman who claimed to be his sister waited under guard. But eventually, duty dragged him back. It always did. The crown was a weight he could not set down, no matter how much his shoulders ached. She was sitting on a camp stool when he entered, still filthy, still exhausted, but there was something in her posture that suggested she would not fall over, would not break. 2 guards flanked the entrance. Ragnar stood in the corner, arms crossed, face carved from disapproval. Dorian dismissed the guards with a gesture. When Ragnar did not move, he met the older man's gaze and repeated the gesture. Alone. Ragnar left, but the look he gave Alara promised that this was far from finished. When the tent flap fell shut behind him, Dorian and Alara were left in the flickering light of a single lantern, 2 strangers bound by blood neither of them had chosen. Dorian moved to the table, poured water from a pitcher into 2 cups, offered one to Alara. She took it with both hands, drank like she had been wandering a desert. When she lowered the cup, her lips were less cracked, her eyes a fraction less haunted. Tell me about your mother. His voice was not gentle, but it was no longer hostile. It was the voice of someone trying to navigate impossible terrain without a map. Alara set the cup down. Her name was Maren Thornwick. She lived in a village at the edge of Ashcroft territory. She was a healer. She met your father 25 years ago when he came through on a border inspection. They spoke. They continued to speak. Eventually, they were more than strangers who spoke. Dorian listened, tried to imagine his father, the hard man who had ruled with iron certainty, having something as human as an affair, as a relationship that existed outside of politics and power. When did she tell you? When I was old enough to understand. 12, maybe 13. She said your father had promised to come back for us, to bring us to the capital, to acknowledge me. But he never did. There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact, the reporting of something that had shaped her but not broken her. She died 2 weeks ago. Fever. At the end, she made me promise to find you, said you would need me, said you were alone and carrying too much and that I was the only one who could help. I did not understand, but I promised, and I keep my promises. Dorian found himself studying her face, looking for traces of Aldrich in the shape of her jaw, the set of her eyes, looking for proof beyond the mark, and finding it, in small ways, in the stubborn tilt of her chin, in the way she met his gaze without flinching. The mark, show it to me again. Alara pushed up her sleeve without hesitation. The crescent moon and star gleamed in the lantern light, silver against pale skin. Dorian moved closer, close enough to smell the road on her, the exhaustion, the particular scent that was hers beneath all the layers of travel. He reached out, hesitated, then traced the mark with one finger. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. It was not pain. It was not pleasure. It was recognition. It was a hook sinking into his chest and pulling tight. It was every instinct he had spent his life controlling suddenly roaring to life and screaming a single word over and over. Mine, mine, mine. Dorian jerked his hand back as if burned. Ilara gasped, her eyes going wide, that amber light flaring bright enough to fill the tent. They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been an abyss. What was that? Ilara's voice shook. Dorian could not answer, could not speak, because he knew what that was. Every wolf knew. It was the bond, the mate bond. The thing that happened maybe once in a lifetime if you were blessed or cursed by the moon goddess. The recognition of the other half of your soul. And it had just snapped into place between him and the woman who claimed to be his sister. The impossibility of it stole his breath. The wrongness. The absolute violation of every law, every code, every understanding of how the world was supposed to work. You could not be bonded to your own blood. The moon goddess did not make those kinds of mistakes, did not create those kinds of curses. Get out. His voice was strangled, barely human. Get out now. Ilara stood, swaying. I do not understand what just happened, but I felt it too. Whatever it was, whatever you are afraid of, I felt it. Out! The word was not shouted. It was torn from somewhere deep in his chest. It was the sound of a man realizing he stood on the edge of an abyss and could feel the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Ilara moved toward the tent flap. At the entrance, she paused, looked back. I came here to help you. Whether you believe me or not, whether you want it or not, I will not leave until I do. Then she was gone, and Dorian was alone with the lantern light and the terrible knowing that his world had just become infinitely more complicated. He sank onto the camp stool she had vacated. It still held the warmth of her body. He could still smell her scent, could still feel the phantom burn where his skin had touched hers. The bond hummed in his chest, a living thing, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement. Sister. Mate. 2 words that could not exist in the same sentence. 2 truths that could not both be real. But they were, and Dorian had no idea how to survive them both. The tent flap opened again. Ragnar entered without invitation, his face grave. I have her under guard in one of the supply tents. What did she say? What did you learn? Dorian looked up at his mentor, his war master, the man who had taught him everything he knew about being a king. And he lied. Nothing useful. Keep her under guard. Tomorrow I will decide what to do with her. Ragnar studied him for a long moment. There was something in the old wolf's eyes, something calculating, something that made Dorian's instincts, already raw and screaming, prickle with warning. As you command, my king, but I would advise caution. Whatever she is, whoever sent her, she has already gotten under your skin. That makes her dangerous. Everything is dangerous, Ragnar. The question is whether she is a weapon pointed at me or a tool I can use. Tomorrow, I will find out which. Ragnar bowed his head and left. When the tent was empty again, Dorian stood, moved to the small chest that held his personal effects, pulled out a bottle of whiskey that was reserved for the nights when sleep seemed impossible. He poured a measure into a cup, drank it, poured another, and tried not to think about amber eyes and silver marks and the way his entire body had recognized something his mind refused to accept. In a tent across the camp, Elara Thornwick sat on a bedroll, arms wrapped around her knees, and wondered what she had walked into. The bond between them, whatever it was, pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She could feel him, his turmoil, his fear, his rage, could feel the war he was fighting inside himself. Her mother had said he would need her, had said she was meant to help him, but Marin had not explained this, had not warned her that finding her brother would feel like finding the missing half of herself. Elara closed her eyes, let her senses extend, felt the camp around her. Hundreds of men, hundreds of wolves in human skin, their presences like small fires in her awareness. And in the center, burning brighter than all the rest, was Dorian. An inferno barely contained, a king on the edge of breaking. She had not lied. She could feel his curse, could sense the thing eating him from within, the rage that was becoming less like an emotion and more like a living entity. If something did not change, if he did not find a way to control it or cure it, he would be consumed. And somehow, impossibly, she knew she was the key to saving him, even if neither of them understood how, even if the very idea was madness. Elara lay back on the bedroll, stared up at the canvas ceiling, and let exhaustion finally claim her. Tomorrow would bring answers, or it would bring more questions. Either way, she had kept her promise to her mother. She had found her brother, and now, somehow, she had to find a way to save him from himself. Dawn came to the war camp like an unwelcome guest, cold and gray and indifferent to the men who had survived the night. Dorian had not slept. He had spent the hours between midnight and morning staring at maps that offered no answers, drinking whiskey that offered no comfort, and trying not to think about the woman sleeping 50 yards away, whose presence had turned his entire understanding of the world inside out. The mate bond hummed in his chest, a constant awareness of her. He could feel her exhaustion, the deep weariness that came from 3 weeks of desperate travel, could sense the moment she woke, the spike of confusion as she remembered where she was, the steady resolve that followed. She was afraid, but she was not broken. That impressed him more than he wanted to admit. He dressed in the dark. Leather and steel, the armor of a king who spent more time in war camps than throne rooms. The mirror in his tent showed him a man who looked older than 32. Shadows under his eyes, new lines around his mouth, the scar on his jaw that was a souvenir from a border skirmish 3 years ago. The beast inside him was closer to the surface today, clawing at his control, demanding he go to her, demand answers, understand what she was and what she meant. He ignored it. Control was all he had left. The War Council assembled before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Ragnar arrived first, as always, his face showing the strain of a man who had also not slept. Warden Thorne came next, carrying reports written in the cramped handwriting of supply officers who calculated death in units of food and arrows. Lady Silvara brought the scent of the medical tent with her, herbs and blood, and the particular exhaustion of those who spent their nights fighting losing battles against mortality. Elder Cassius was last, moving with the careful deliberation of age, his walking stick tapping against frozen ground. They gathered around the map table. Dorian did not waste time on pleasantries. The woman, Elara Thornwick. I have verified that the mark she bears is genuine. She is Aldrich's daughter, my half-sister. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Ragnar's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, assessment, the look of a strategist evaluating a new piece on the board. Then we have a problem. Cassius leaned heavily on his walking stick. By law, she has a claim to recognition, not to the throne, as she is female and born outside of marriage, but to the protection and resources of the Ashcroft bloodline. You cannot simply ignore her existence. I do not intend to ignore it. Dorian's hands were flat on the table, the wood worn smooth by weeks of similar conversations. I intend to verify her story, to understand what she wants, and to determine if she is an asset or a liability. She claims she can sense things. Ragnar's voice was carefully neutral. That she felt your condition from 200 miles away. That is not a common ability. Silvara spoke up, her tone thoughtful. There are old stories, of seers. women born with the ability to sense the emotional states of others, to feel the presence of wolves even in human form. The bloodlines were thought extinct, bred out over generations of intermarriage with humans. But if her mother's line was from an old pack that went into hiding, went dormant, it is possible the gift remained. A gift. Dorian's voice was flat. Or a curse. Or a very convenient lie designed to make me believe she is something she is not. There is one way to test it. Warden Thorn traced a line on the map with one blunt finger. The Frostborn are dug in on the eastern ridge. We have been unable to dislodge them for 3 days. They have the high ground, and our scouts cannot get close enough to give us accurate numbers without being killed. If this woman can truly sense wolf presence, she should be able to tell us exactly how many enemies we face and where they are positioned. It was a test. A cruel one, perhaps. But war had no room for kindness. If Alara could do what she claimed, she would prove herself valuable. If she could not, she would be exposed as a fraud or a fool. Either way, they would have an answer. Dorian looked at each of them in turn, saw the calculation in Ragnar's eyes, the clinical interest in Silvara's expression, the weary pragmatism on Thorn's face, the scholarly curiosity in Cassius's gaze. They were waiting for him to make a decision, to be the king. Bring her. Alara was escorted to the command tent by 2 guards who looked like they expected her to sprout fangs and attack at any moment. She was cleaner than she had been the night before. Someone had brought her water to wash with, and the worst of the mud had been scrubbed from her face and hands. Her hair was still tangled, her clothes still torn and stained, but her eyes were clear, alert. She looked at the assembled council with the kind of wariness that came from a lifetime of being judged and found wanting. Dorian watched her take in the room, saw her gaze linger on Ragnar, on the cold assessment in his face, saw her notice Silvara's interest, Thorn's skepticism, Cassius's careful neutrality. She was reading them, learning them. Smart. Miss Thornwick. Dorian's voice was formal, the tone he used for negotiations with foreign dignitaries. You claim to have the ability to sense wolf presence, to feel emotions and positions even at a distance. We are going to test that claim. Alara lifted her chin. The gesture was small but defiant. What do you want me to do? Warden Thorn pointed to the map. The eastern ridge, 3 miles from here. The Frostborn have held that position for 3 days. We need to know their numbers and their disposition. If you can truly sense them, you should be able to tell us. Without going there? Alara moved closer to the table, studied the map with an intensity that suggested she understood more about military strategy than a village healer's daughter should. Just from here? The bond between us. Dorian spoke before he could stop himself. The words came out rough, reluctant. If it is real, if you can truly feel what I feel, then you should be able to sense what I sense. My wolf knows where every enemy is within a certain radius. It is an alpha's gift. If we are connected, you should have access to that knowledge. Alara's eyes met his across the table. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, understanding, fear. She nodded slowly. I can try. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, deepened. The tent fell silent except for the distant sounds of the camp, the morning routines of an army preparing for another day of potential dying. Dorian watched her face, saw the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, saw her lips part as though she were tasting the air, and then he felt it. A presence in his mind, not invasive, not violent, but there, like a hand reaching through the bond between them, seeking, searching. His wolf stirred, alert, but not aggressive. It recognized her, accepted her. The realization sent a chill down his spine. Alara's eyes snapped open. They were glowing. Not metaphorically, actually glowing, that amber light bright enough to cast shadows in the morning dimness of the tent. When she spoke, her voice was distant, dreamy, as though she were reporting from somewhere far away. 318. She pointed to the map, her finger moving with uncanny precision. Here, 83 on the ridgeline itself. Here, in the trees to the north, another 70. A supply camp behind the ridge, 112. 43 on patrol routes, moving. 20 reserve near the command tent. Her finger traced positions, drew invisible lines, marked concentrations of force with the accuracy of someone who had studied the terrain for weeks. They're Alpha. His name is Bjorn. I can feel him. He is angry. So angry. It burns like fire. He is in the center, surrounded by his personal guard. 20 warriors who would die for him without hesitation. He does not sleep well. Dreams of blood and vengeance. Dreams of making you pay for what your father did. Dorian's hands were gripping the edge of the table hard enough to make the wood creak. This was impossible. She should not be able to know these things, should not be able to sense with such precision. But even as his mind rejected it, his instincts confirmed it. Every detail she spoke felt true. Ragnar stepped forward, his voice sharp. This proves nothing. She could have been briefed by Frostborn agents, given this information to make us believe she is legitimate. Then send scouts. Alara's eyes dimmed back to their normal amber, but she swayed on her feet, exhausted. Verify what I have told you. If I am wrong, I am a liar. If I am right, I am useful. Either way, you will know. The tent erupted into discussion. Thorn was already giving orders for scouts to verify positions. Silvara was watching Alara with open fascination, the look of someone who had just witnessed something from the realm of legend. Cassius was muttering about old texts, historical precedents, the laws that governed gifts like this. Dorian was silent. He was staring at Alara, at the woman who had just reached into his mind through a bond he did not want and pulled out military intelligence that should have been impossible for her to access. She met his gaze. There was no triumph in her expression, no smugness, just exhaustion and a kind of quiet resignation. You felt it. Her voice was low, meant only for him in the chaos of the others talking. You felt me there, in your mind. And you did not fight it. Your wolf let me in. He had. That was the terrifying part. His wolf, the beast he controlled with iron discipline, had opened the door to her consciousness and invited her inside. Had recognized her not just as pack, but as something more, something essential. Before he could respond, one of Thorn's scouts burst into the tent, breathing hard from running. My king, I was on watch near the eastern ridge, I can confirm. 82 warriors on the ridgeline. I counted them myself before pulling back. She was right. The tent went silent. Everyone turned to look at Alara. She had not moved, had not reacted. She simply stood there, looking like she might collapse at any moment, and waited for judgment. Dorian made a decision that would change everything. She stays. She works with our scouts. If she can provide this kind of intelligence, she is worth more than a dozen spy networks. Warden Thorn, assign her quarters. Lady Silvara, make sure she is fed and given clean clothes. Ragnar, adjust our strategy based on these numbers. If we know exactly where they are, we can plan an attack that does not waste lives. He turned to Alara. You will be watched. You will be guarded. But if you continue to prove useful, you will be treated as a member of this camp. Do you understand? Alara nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something, but exhaustion finally won. Her knees buckled. Dorian moved without thinking, crossed the space between them in 2 strides, caught her before she hit the ground. The moment his hands touched her arms, the bond flared. Electric, overwhelming, a rush of her exhaustion flooding into him, his strength flooding into her, a connection so profound it stole breath. He lowered her carefully into a chair. She looked up at him with those glowing eyes and whispered words only he could hear. Thank you for not killing me, for giving me a chance. Do not thank me yet. His voice was rough. You have not seen what war does to chances. The next 3 days passed in a blur of motion and violence. Alara was installed in a tent near the command center, under constant guard but no longer a prisoner. Silvara brought her food and clean clothes, questioned her about her abilities with the focused intensity of a scholar finding a new manuscript. Alara answered what she could, but even she did not fully understand the gift she possessed. She could sense wolves, their positions, their emotional states, the strength of their presence. It was like hearing music that others were deaf to, seeing colors that existed only for her. And through the bond with Dorian, the ability was amplified. His alpha senses combined with her seer gift created something unprecedented, a tactical advantage that could turn the tide of a losing war. Dorian used it. He was not proud of it, was not comfortable with the intimacy it required, the way he had to lower his mental shields and let her inside his awareness. But he was a king at war, and he would use every weapon available. They planned an assault on the eastern ridge, 3-pronged, using the exact positions Alara had provided. Dorian would lead the center, Ragnar the left flank, Thorn the right. They would hit at dawn, when the Frostborn were tired from night watches and slow to respond. Alara would stay at the command post on a hill overlooking the battlefield. She would watch, would sense, would warn them of any movements or ambushes the scouts could not see. She would be their eyes in the dark. The night before the battle, Dorian found her standing outside her tent, looking up at the stars. She was wrapped in a fur cloak someone had given her, her breath misting in the cold air. She did not turn when he approached, but he felt her awareness of him through the bond, a warm pulse of recognition. "You do not have to do this." His voice was quiet. "If we lose tomorrow, if I die, you would be free. Could go back to whatever life you had before." Alara finally looked at him. In the starlight, her eyes seemed more gold than amber. "I made a promise to my mother, to help you survive. I do not break promises, and besides, I do not think I could leave now even if I wanted to." Because of the bond. It was not a question, but she nodded anyway. "I feel you, all the time. Your anger, your fear, your determination. It is like you are standing next to me even when you are miles away. I do not know if I could walk away from that, if I could survive the severing." Dorian was silent for a long moment. Then, against every instinct of self-preservation, he told her the truth. "I dream about you. Every night since you arrived. I dream that you are in danger and I cannot reach you. I wake up in a cold sweat, reaching for weapons, ready to tear apart anything that threatens you. It is irrational. It is dangerous. It is the bond trying to make me into something I cannot afford to be." "What is that?" "Weak." The word was bitter in his mouth. A king cannot be ruled by instinct, cannot let personal feelings override strategic necessity. But when I look at you, all I want to do is keep you safe, even if that means keeping you away from me." Alara stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her scent beneath the borrowed soap, the particular essence that was hers alone. When she spoke, her voice was fierce. "I am not weak. I walked 3 weeks through enemy territory. I stood in front of a war council that wanted to kill me and proved my worth. I will stand on that hill tomorrow and help you win a battle that will save lives. Do not insult me by calling me a weakness. I am choosing to be here, choosing to help. That is strength, not fragility." Dorian looked down at her, saw the fire in her eyes, the set of her jaw, saw his father in the stubborn tilt of her chin, but saw something softer too, something that was entirely her own. Compassion, determination, a core of steel wrapped in humanity. "If you die tomorrow because I brought you here, I will never forgive myself. Then do not let me die. Win, survive. And maybe, when this is over, we can figure out what this bond means and how we are supposed to live with it." She turned and went back into her tent, leaving him standing in the cold with the weight of her words and the terrible knowledge that she was right. She was not his weakness. She was something far more dangerous. She was becoming necessary. The battle began at dawn. Dorian led his warriors down from the high ground, swords drawn, voices raised in the war cries that had echoed through these mountains for 1,000 years. The Frostborn met them with equal fury, and the eastern ridge became a churning mass of bodies and blood and the terrible arithmetic of combat. Alara stood on her hill, flanked by guards, her hands gripping the rough wood of a fence post. She could feel it all. Every wolf on that battlefield was a presence in her mind. Dorian was a bonfire in the center, burning bright and fierce. She could sense his focus, his deadly calm, the way he moved through the fight like a force of nature. But she could also sense the ambush, 40 Frostborn warriors, circling through the ravine to the left. They were moving to flank Ragnar's position. If they succeeded, they would collapse the entire left side of Dorian's formation. The battle would be lost. She screamed the warning. Her voice carried across the battlefield, amplified by desperation, and something else. Something primal. Dorian's head snapped around. Even at this distance, she felt his acknowledgement through the bond. He redirected troops, sent 20 warriors to intercept. The flanking maneuver failed. The Frostborn were pushed back. The battle turned. And then Alara felt something else, a presence that made her blood run cold. Bjorn Frostborn was moving, not toward Dorian, but toward the hill, toward her. He had seen what she was doing, had understood that she was the key to Dorian's tactical advantage, and he was coming to remove that advantage. Alara's guards saw them too late. Bjorn and 10 of his personal warriors hit the position like a hammer. The guards fought. 2 of them died in seconds. The others were overwhelmed, and suddenly Bjorn was standing in front of her, enormous and scarred and radiating rage. "You are the one who sees." His voice was gravel and iron, the human witch who gives the false king eyes he should not have. Alara could not move, could not breathe. She was staring at death, and death was staring back with cold blue eyes that promised violence. Bjorn reached for her throat. His hand closed around her neck, lifted her off the ground. She clawed at his fingers, gasping, feeling her vision start to gray at the edges. And through the bond, she felt Dorian's awareness snap to her, felt his absolute terror, felt his rage ignite into something that was no longer human. The sound that tore across the battlefield was not a shout. It was a roar, primal, absolute. The sound of an alpha who had just watched his mate threatened. Every wolf on that ridge, Ashcroft and Frostborn alike, froze. Instinct older than thought recognized that sound, recognized the fury behind it. Dorian was coming, and he was no longer a man in control of his beast. He was the beast given human shape and purpose. He covered the distance in seconds, shifted mid-run, his human form exploding into something larger, darker, more terrifying. A black wolf the size of a horse, eyes burning white with rage, jaws capable of crushing stone. He hit Bjorn like an avalanche. The Frostborn Alpha dropped Alara, turned to meet the attack, shifted into his own war form, a gray wolf only slightly smaller but equally scarred. They collided in a tangle of fur and fangs and killing intent. Alara fell to the ground, gasping, her throat bruised but not crushed. She watched through watering eyes as the 2 alphas tried to murder each other, watched Dorian fight with a savagery that went beyond tactics or training. This was pure instinct, pure need, the absolute refusal to allow harm to come to what the wolf had claimed as its own. Bjorn was skilled, deadly, but he was fighting strategy against instinct, and instinct was winning. Dorian's jaws found Bjorn's shoulder, tore deep. Blood sprayed across frozen ground. The Frostborn Alpha howled, more in rage than pain, and managed to throw Dorian off. They circled each other, both bleeding, both beyond reason. The battlefield had stopped. Every warrior was watching their alphas fight, knowing that this was no longer about territory or blood debt. This was something older, more fundamental. Bjorn lunged. Dorian met him. They went down in a rolling, snarling mass. When they separated, Dorian had Bjorn pinned, jaws around the other alpha's throat. Not biting down, not yet, but the threat was clear. Absolute. Move and die. Bjorn went still. His blue eyes were wide, not with fear, but with recognition. He had felt it. The bond. The reason Dorian had fought like the world was ending. No alpha fought that way unless their mate was threatened. And Bjorn understood, in that moment, that he had not just attacked a tactical asset. He had attacked Dorian Ashcroft's fated mate. Dorian held him there for 5 endless seconds. Then slowly he released the killing grip, stepped back, shifted back to human form, standing naked and bleeding in the morning light, every inch of him radiating the promise of death if Bjorn moved wrong. The Frostborn Alpha shifted back as well, pressed a hand to his torn shoulder, stared at Dorian with something that might have been respect. "The battle is done." Dorian's voice was hoarse, raw from the roar. "Your warriors will stand down, or I will kill every single one of them, starting with you." Bjorn looked at Alara, still gasping on the ground, looked back at Dorian, saw the absolute truth in his eyes. "Stand down," Bjorn's voice carried across the ridge. "All Frostborn forces, stand down. We withdraw." The battlefield erupted into chaos. Ashcroft warriors cheering, Frostborn warriors retreating in organized columns, carrying their wounded, their faces showing confusion and relief in equal measure. The battle was over. Dorian had won. But as he crossed the hilltop to where Alara was struggling to her feet, as he wrapped her in his arms without thought or hesitation, as he buried his face in her hair and felt her heartbeat against his chest and whispered apologies and promises against her skin, he knew the truth. He had won the battle, but he had lost the war inside himself. The wolf had claimed her, had marked her as mate in front of 2 armies, and there was no taking that back. That night, after the wounded had been tended and the dead had been counted, and the victory had been celebrated with the grim satisfaction of men who had survived another day, Dorian sat in his tent and tried to understand what he had become. Ragnar found him there. The old commander entered without knocking, his face carved from disapproval. "You shifted in front of the entire army. You fought like a rabid animal. You claimed that woman as your mate for all to see. Do you understand what you have done?" Dorian looked up at his mentor, at the man who had taught him control, discipline, the art of being a king instead of a beast. And he saw something in Ragnar's eyes that made his instincts prickle. Not concern, not worry, but calculation. Cold and clinical and wrong. "I saved her life." His voice was flat. "What would you have had me do? Let Bjorn kill her?" "I would have had you remember that you are a king first and a wolf second." Ragnar moved closer, his voice dropping. "That woman is dangerous. Not because of what she is, but because of what she makes you. Weak, emotional, compromised. A king cannot afford to care that much about one person. She saved dozens of lives today. Her intelligence won us that battle. And tomorrow? What happens when the enemy learns that the way to destroy you is to threaten her? What happens when she becomes a liability instead of an asset?" Ragnar's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I taught you better than this. I taught you that power requires sacrifice, that caring is weakness, that a true king stands alone." Dorian stood. He was taller than Ragnar, broader, younger, but the old wolf did not back down, did not show fear. They stood face to face in the dim tent, two men who had once trusted each other absolutely and felt that trust begin to crack. "Perhaps you taught me wrong." Dorian's voice was soft, dangerous. "Perhaps standing alone is not strength. Perhaps it is just loneliness." Ragnar's eyes hardened. "Then you are lost, and when she destroys you, do not say I did not warn you." He left. Dorian was alone again, but not truly alone. Through the bond, he could feel Alara in her tent, could sense her exhaustion, her lingering fear, her fierce joy at having survived, could feel her awareness of him, the way she was thinking about him even as she tried to sleep. He closed his eyes. Let himself sink into that connection. Let himself feel what it was like to not be alone in his own head. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something that might have been peace. 3 days later, everything fell apart. It started with a supply run, 20 wagons heading to the forward positions, guarded by 30 warriors, a routine operation. Alara had volunteered to accompany them. She wanted to prove that she could be useful beyond standing on hilltops and sensing enemies, wanted to show that she could handle herself in the real work of war. Mira Nightshade led the escort. She was Ragnar's protégé, 26 years old and hard as winter iron. She had not said 10 words to Alara since her arrival, but she had not tried to kill her either. That was progress. The ambush came 5 miles from camp, 40 Frostborn warriors hidden in the ravines. They hit the supply column like a hammer. Wagons overturned, guards scrambled for weapons, blood and chaos and the terrible confusion of sudden violence. Alara felt them half a second before they attacked, screamed a warning. It saved 5 lives. Would have saved more if they had been ready, if someone had not given the Frostborn exact details of their route, their timing, their strength. There was a spy in Dorian's camp, and whoever it was had just tried to have Alara killed. Mira fought like a demon. Her sword was a silver blur, cutting through Frostborn warriors with precision and rage. Alara grabbed a fallen blade, fought with the desperate clumsiness of someone untrained. She killed 1 man, nearly died 3 times. Felt Dorian's awareness spike through the bond, felt his terror and fury from miles away. They survived. Barely. Mira took an arrow through the leg. 4 guards died. The supplies were lost. And when they limped back to camp, covered in blood and defeat, Dorian met them at the perimeter. He looked at Alara, at the blood on her hands, the hollow shock in her eyes, at the fact that she was alive when she should have been dead. And something in him shifted, hardened. He turned to Ragnar. "Find the spy. Interrogate every man who knew about that supply run. I want answers by nightfall." The interrogations were brutal. Dorian did them himself, one after another, looking into the eyes of men he had trusted and searching for the lie. He found it in a junior officer named Kyle, a young man with ambition and a secret. Under questioning, Kyle broke. Admitted he had been passing information. not to the Frostborn, to someone else. Someone inside the camp who was using the war for their own purposes. When Dorian demanded a name, Cale gave it. Elder Cassius. The revelation hit the camp like a thunderbolt. Elder Cassius, keeper of laws, historian, the walking conscience of the kingdom. A traitor. They found him in his tent, surrounded by correspondence, maps, calculations. When Dorian confronted him, Cassius did not deny it, did not even look ashamed. I did what I believed was right. The old man's voice was calm. Your father committed murder during peace talks. The blood debt is real. By wolf law, you should surrender, should accept judgment. But you refuse. So I have been ensuring that this war ends the only way it can, with your defeat. You betrayed me. Dorian's voice shook. Cost me men, nearly cost me her. I am trying to save our people. Cassius met his gaze without flinching. If you win this war through dishonor, every pack in the realm will turn against us. We will be isolated, destroyed. Sometimes a king must be sacrificed for the good of his kingdom. Dorian stared at him, at this man who had taught him law and history and honor, who had twisted those lessons into justification for treachery. Put him in chains. Dorian's voice was dead, empty. Tomorrow the council will decide his fate. That night Dorian did not go to his tent. He went to Alara's, found her sitting on her bedroll, staring at nothing, still wearing the blood-stained clothes from the ambush. She looked up when he entered, did not speak, did not need to. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that the bond between them was a warm presence instead of a distant hum. I nearly lost you today. His voice was rough. I felt it, miles away, felt the moment the ambush started, felt your terror, your determination, your will to survive, and I could not get to you, could not protect you. You did protect me. Alara's voice was quiet. You sent the best escort. You trained them well. Mira saved my life 3 times. I am here because of the choices you made. Dorian turned to look at her, saw the bruises on her throat from where Bjorn had grabbed her, saw the cut on her cheek from a blade that had come too close, saw the woman who had walked into his war and refused to break. I am tired of fighting what this is. His words came out raw, unfiltered. This bond, this connection. I am tired of pretending I do not feel you in every breath I take, tired of lying to myself that you are just another tactical asset, just my father's bastard daughter, just a convenient tool. Then stop pretending. Alara reached out, placed her hand over his heart. The touch was electric, grounding. What do you feel right now? Not what you think you should feel, what you actually feel. Dorian closed his eyes, let himself be honest. For once, terror, that I will lose you, rage, at anyone who threatens you, and something else, something I do not have a name for, a need to be near you, to know you are safe, to hear your voice, not because you are useful, but because you are necessary. When he opened his eyes, Alara was looking at him with an expression he could not read. Then she did something that changed everything. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not gentle, not tentative. It was fierce and desperate and filled with all the things neither of them could say. It was the taste of survival, the relief of still being alive, the acknowledgement of something that had been building since the moment they met. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. That is what I feel. Alara's voice shook. That you are necessary to me too. That this bond is not a curse. It is the only thing that makes sense in all of this chaos. And I am done fighting it. Dorian looked at her. At this woman who had saved his army, who had survived ambush and assault, who looked at him like he was a man instead of a king. And he made a choice. He kissed her again. Deeper this time. Slower. A promise instead of a question. And for the first time since she had walked into his war, he let himself believe that maybe Ragnar was wrong. Maybe caring was not weakness. Maybe standing together was the only real strength there was. Tomorrow would bring trials and judgment, would bring questions about traitors and consequences, would bring the next battle, the next crisis, the next impossible choice. But tonight, in a tent at the edge of a war camp, 2 people who should never have met found something that felt like home. Dawn came with frost on the ground and judgment in the air. Elder Cassius stood in chains before the assembled war council, his white beard catching the early light, his eyes calm in a way that suggested he had made peace with whatever fate awaited him. Behind him, 300 warriors formed a semicircle, witnesses to a trial that would determine more than one man's guilt. It would determine what kind of kingdom Dorian Ashcroft intended to rule. Dorian stood at the center, Alara beside him. He had not asked her to be there, but she had come anyway, dressed in borrowed armor that fit poorly, but declared her intention to stand as more than a helpless observer. Her presence was a statement. She was not hidden, not protected behind walls. She was here, visible, claiming her place. Ragnar read the charges. His voice was flat, professional, but there was something underneath, a satisfaction that made Dorian's instincts prickle with warning. Treason, conspiracy with enemy forces, deliberate sabotage resulting in the deaths of 4 Ashcroft warriors. Under wolf law, each charge carried a single sentence: death. "Cassius, you stand accused," Dorian's voice carried across the silent assembly. "What say you in your defense?" The old elder lifted his chin. His chains clinked softly. "I say that I acted according to my conscience and the laws I have served for 50 years. King Aldrich murdered Alpha Eric Frostborn during peace negotiations. That crime created a blood debt. By our own laws, that debt transfers to the heir. You, Dorian Ashcroft, owe the Frostborn your life or your throne. I have been working to ensure that debt is paid in the way that costs the fewest lives." Ragnar stepped forward. "You admit to treason." "I admit to serving a higher law than the whims of a compromised king." Cassius turned his gaze on Dorian. "You have been bewitched. This woman, this half-blood bastard, has wrapped herself around your judgment like poison. You make decisions based on protecting her instead of protecting your people. I have seen it. The entire camp has seen it. You shifted in front of 2 armies to save her life. You claimed her as mate, binding yourself to a connection that weakens you. Every choice you make now is filtered through her safety instead of strategic necessity." The accusation hung in the air. Dorian felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes, felt the question that none of them dared speak aloud. Was Cassius right? Had the bond compromised him? Had his need to protect Alara turned him into something less than a king? Alara's hand found his. The touch was brief, grounding, a reminder that he was not alone in this moment, that strength could exist in partnership, not just isolation. "You speak of law." Dorian's voice was cold, controlled. "But you violated the most fundamental law of all, loyalty. You betrayed your alpha, sent men to their deaths through your sabotage, nearly cost me someone I have chosen to protect. You wrapped your treason in the language of honor, but it remains treason." "Then kill me." Cassius's voice was steady. "Execute me for serving the law as I understand it. But know this, the blood debt is real. The Frostborn will not forget, will not forgive. And one day they will come for what is owed, and your people will pay the price for your refusal to do what is right." Dorian was silent for a long moment. He could feel the assembly waiting, could feel Ragnar's expectation of swift, brutal justice, could feel Alara's quiet presence, not pushing, not pulling, just being there. A reminder that he had choices, that kings could be more than their worst impulses. "The law says you should die." His words fell like stones. "But I am not interested in being the kind of king who rules through fear alone. You will be stripped of your title. Your lands and holdings forfeit to the crown. You will be exiled beyond our borders, never to return on pain of death. You will live with the knowledge that your honor cost you everything, and you will carry that weight until your last breath." The assembly erupted, some in approval, seeing mercy as strength, others in outrage, seeing mercy as weakness. Ragnar's face went carefully blank, but his eyes flashed with something dark. Disappointment or calculation. Cassius stared at Dorian with something that might have been respect. "You are not your father. Whether that is strength or weakness remains to be seen. Take him to the border." Dorian turned away, the decision made. See that he has supplies for 3 days. After that, his survival is his own concern. As guards led Cassius away, Dorian felt Alara's hand squeeze his one more time. When he looked at her, she was smiling. Small, sad, but genuine. "You gave him more than he deserved." Her voice was low, meant only for him. "Perhaps, but I did not want to become what Cassius believed me to be. A king who rules only through blood." Before she could respond, Warden Thorne approached, his face grave. My king, there is another matter. The Frostborn have sent an envoy. They request audience. The envoy arrived under flag of truce. Not Bjorn, but a woman. She was tall, scarred, with eyes the color of winter ice and the bearing of someone who had earned her authority through violence. She introduced herself as Astrid Frostborn, Bjorn's second-in-command and sister. She stood in the command tent, surrounded by Ashcroft warriors, and delivered her message with the precision of someone who had memorized every word. Alpha Bjorn Frostborn acknowledges the strength of King Dorian Ashcroft, acknowledges the bond that was revealed on the battlefield, acknowledges that the debt owed may not be as simple as once believed. He offers terms, a meeting, neutral ground. 4 days hence, he will bring proof of what occurred 30 years ago at Winterhold. King Dorian will bring his seer. Together we will determine the truth. If Aldrich Ashcroft is guilty, Dorian will answer for it. If Aldrich is innocent, the debt is void and the war ends. The tent fell silent. It was a gamble. A meeting could be an ambush, could be a trap, but it was also an opportunity to end the war without more bloodshed, to find answers that had been buried for 3 decades. What proof does Bjorn claim to have? Dorian's voice was careful, neutral. Astrid met his gaze and without flinching. A witness. Someone who was there at Winterhold. Someone whose testimony will be accepted by both sides. And if we refuse, then the war continues until one of us is destroyed. Astrid's voice held no threat, just fact. Bjorn offers this because he saw what you became when your mate was threatened. He understands that you will burn the world to keep her safe. He does not wish to fight that war. Not if there is another way. Dorian looked at Alara. She was studying Astrid with the intense focus she used when sensing emotions. After a moment, she gave a small nod. The Frostborn woman was telling the truth, at least as far as she knew it. We will come. Dorian's decision was instant. 3 days, neutral ground. We bring 10 warriors. Bjorn brings the same. Any violation of truce terms, and we end this the old way, in blood. Astrid bowed her head. It will be as you say. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, King Dorian, I am glad you are not the man we thought you were, the man we were prepared to destroy. Then she was gone, leaving Dorian with the decision made and 3 days to prepare for a meeting that would determine everything. That night, Dorian found Alara in the healer's tent, helping Silvara tend to wounded warriors. She had become a fixture there over the past weeks, using her hands where her seer abilities could not help, learning to set bones, stitch flesh, ease pain. The men had stopped flinching when she approached, had started to see her not as the king's weakness, but as someone who gave a damn whether they lived or died. Walk with me. Dorian's voice was quiet. Alara washed blood from her hands, followed him out into the cold night. They walked to the edge of camp, where the firelight faded and the forest began, where they could speak without being overheard by 300 curious ears. In 3 days we meet with Bjorn. Dorian stopped, turned to face her. If he has proof that my father was guilty, I will have to answer for it. By wolf law, I will have to offer my life or my throne. Either way, everything changes. Alara reached up, touched his face. Her fingers were cold, but her eyes were warm. Then we make sure that does not happen. We find the truth. Real truth, not the version Bjorn has been carrying for 30 years. How? Lady Silvara spoke of old magic, seer magic. She says there are rituals that can read memories from blood. If you and I share blood with your father, if I use my gift and the bond between us, I might be able to see what really happened at Winterhold, to see through Aldrich's eyes. Dorian felt something cold settle in his chest. That kind of magic is forbidden. It kills the seer, burns their mind from the inside. Silvara says there is a chance I survive. I am strong. The bond with you might protect me, might anchor me so I do not get lost in the memory. Alara's voice was steady, certain. We have to try. If there is any chance your father was innocent, any chance this war is based on lies, we have to know. No. The word came out harsher than intended. I will not risk you for this. I will face Bjorn's truth and deal with the consequences. And what happens to your people when their king is executed or exiled? Alara's voice rose, fierce. What happens to this kingdom? You told me strength comes from standing together. Let me stand with you now. Let me use this gift for something that matters. They stood there in the darkness, 2 stubborn wills colliding. Finally, Dorian closed his eyes, felt the truth settle into his bones. She was right. They had to know, had to be certain, even if the cost was terrifying. "If you die doing this, I will never forgive you." Alara smiled. "Then I will have to survive. I still have that promise to keep. To help you survive. Cannot do that if I am dead." The ritual took 2 days to prepare. Silvara gathered herbs that had not been used in generations, consulted texts that had been forgotten in the depths of her medical supplies. Lady Astrid watched the preparations with the focused interest of someone seeing legend made real. On the night before the meeting with Bjorn, they performed the ritual in the command tent. Dorian and Alara sat across from each other, a ceremonial bowl between them. Silvara presided, speaking words in the old tongue, the language that wolves had used before they learned human speech. "Both of you must bleed into the bowl." Silvara's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she prepared the ceremonial blade. "Your blood will call to Aldrich's memory, still living in your shared lineage. Alara will drink. She will see what he saw. But Dorian, you must maintain the bond. Keep her anchored. If she goes too deep, if she gets lost in the past, you must pull her back." "How?" "Through the mate bond. Call to her. Remind her who she is, where she belongs." Silvara looked between them. "This will hurt, both of you. The memory ritual does not just show events. It shows emotions, pain, fear. Everything Aldrich felt in that moment will flood through both of you." Dorian cut his palm first, let blood drip into the bowl. The crimson looked black in the candlelight. Then Alara did the same, her smaller hand steady as she drew the blade across her skin. Their blood mixed, swirling together in patterns that seemed to move with intention. Silvara added herbs, spoke words that made the air feel heavy, charged. Then she offered the bowl to Alara. "Drink. And remember, we stand with you." Alara lifted the bowl to her lips, drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes rolled back, showing only white. Her body went rigid. A scream tore from her throat, raw and agonized. Dorian lunged forward, caught her before she fell. Her skin was burning. Her heartbeat was erratic, too fast, then too slow. Through the bond, he felt her consciousness fracturing, splintering, being pulled backward through time toward a memory that had waited 3 decades to be witnessed. And then he was pulled in with her, into the memory, into his father's eyes. He saw Winterhold, a fortress of ice and stone in the far north, saw Alpha Eric Frostborn, a massive man with gray hair and kind eyes, saw his father, younger, harder, but recognizable. They sat across from each other in a great hall, negotiating. The conversation was tense but respectful. Both men wanted peace. Both men saw the cost of war. Then a third figure entered, a man in the colors of the Southern Coalition. He carried wine, offered it to both leaders as a gesture of goodwill, of celebration for the progress they had made. Dorian watched his father hesitate, saw suspicion flicker across Aldrich's face, but Eric drank deeply, and within minutes he was convulsing, poison, fast-acting, irreversible. Aldrich tried to save him, called for healers, held the dying Alpha. And Eric's last words, whispered through bloody lips, were not accusations but warnings. "The South, they want war. Do not give it to them." But the Frostborn warriors who burst into the room saw only their Alpha dying in Aldrich Ashcroft's arms, saw the empty wine cup, saw guilt where there was only tragedy. Aldrich had a choice in that moment: reveal the truth, point to the Southern agent who had already vanished, start a war with the South to clear his name, or accept the blame, let the Frostborn believe he was guilty, contain the conflict to 2 kingdoms instead of 3. Dorian felt his father's anguish, the terrible weight of that choice. Aldrich chose isolation over wider war, chose to be remembered as a murderer to prevent something worse. It was not honor. It was not glory. It was the cold mathematics of a king trying to save as many lives as he could, even if it cost him everything. The memory fractured. Dorian felt Alara's consciousness starting to slip, to be swallowed by the past. He called to her through the bond, used every ounce of his will to pull her back. "Alara, come back. You have seen enough. Come back to me." For a terrible moment, he thought he had lost her. Then her eyes snapped open, amber and aware. She gasped, coughed, blood trickling from her nose and ears. But she was alive, conscious, present. He was innocent. Her voice was hoarse, broken. The Southern Coalition murdered Eric to start a war. Your father let himself be blamed to prevent a larger conflict. He sacrificed his reputation, his honor, everything. Silvara was checking her pulse, her breathing, her eyes. She will live. It was close, but she will live. Dorian held Alara, felt her shaking in his arms, and understood with crystal clarity what his father had been. Not perfect, not without sin, but a man who had made impossible choices and carried the weight of them alone. A man who had loved a woman in secret and created a daughter he could never acknowledge. A man who had ruled through sacrifice instead of glory. Tomorrow we tell Bjorn the truth. Dorian's voice was rough, and we end this war. The meeting took place at dawn in a clearing exactly halfway between the two camps. Bjorn Frostborn arrived with 10 warriors, all of them scarred and deadly. Dorian brought 10 of his own, including Ragnar, Warden Thorn, and Mira Nightshade. Alara stood at his side, visibly weak from the ritual but refusing to be left behind. Astrid Frostborn stood between the two groups, her voice carrying in the cold air. We are here to determine truth, to honor the memories of those who died, and to find a path forward. Alpha Bjorn brings testimony. King Dorian brings his own evidence. We will hear both. Bjorn stepped forward. He was older than Dorian by a few years, perhaps 35, with pale blue eyes and the kind of scars that came from a lifetime of violence. My father raised me on the story of my grandfather's murder during peace talks. I have carried this burden my entire life, have prepared for the moment when I could avenge that death. But I am not a fool. I saw what happened on the battlefield. I saw the bond. I saw a king who would burn the world for his mate. And I ask myself, would a man capable of that kind of love be descended from a cold-blooded murderer? So I have brought someone who was there, who can testify to what happened. He gestured. An old woman stepped forward from the Frostborn ranks. She was ancient, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp. My name is Hilda. I am the Frostborn Seer. I was present at Winterhold, though hidden, observing the negotiations to ensure there was no treachery. I saw what happened. Dorian's chest tightened. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Speak truthfully. Bjorn's voice was hard. Tell us what you saw. Hilda's gaze swept across both groups. Aldrich Ashcroft did not poison Alpha Eric. The Southern Coalition sent an agent. That man brought poisoned wine. I saw him enter, saw him pour, saw him leave before the poison took effect. Aldrich tried to save my Alpha, held him as he died, heard his last words, and then made a choice that has haunted the North for 30 years. He let us believe he was guilty to prevent a war with the South. He sacrificed his honor to save his people and ours from a larger conflict. The clearing erupted. Frostborn warriors shouted denials, demands for proof. Ashcroft warriors moved forward, hands on weapons. The two groups were seconds from violence when Bjorn raised his hand. Silence. The word cracked like thunder. Every wolf went still. Bjorn's eyes were locked on Hilda. You are certain. I am certain. I have carried this secret for 30 years. Carried it because I was ordered to by your grandfather. His dying wish was that Aldrich not be forced to start a war with the South, that the peace be preserved, even if it cost him his reputation. But I am old, tired. I will not carry lies into my grave. Bjorn turned to Dorian. His face was unreadable. Your father. He let us hate him. Let us prepare for war. Let my father raise me to seek vengeance, all to prevent a different war. Dorian nodded. He was not a good man, but he was a man who understood sacrifice, who carried burdens no one knew about, who died with secrets that should have cleared his name. And you. Bjorn's gaze shifted to Alara. You performed the memory ritual. You saw this too. Alara stepped forward, weak but determined. I saw it. Every moment. Your grandfather died asking Aldrich to prevent the war the South wanted. Aldrich honored that dying wish, and it cost him everything. For a long moment, Bjorn stood silent. The tension in the clearing was thick enough to choke on. Then, slowly, the Frostborn Alpha knelt, placed his hand over his heart, the old gesture of a warrior acknowledging debt. I have spent my life preparing to avenge a murder that never happened, have led my warriors into war based on a lie. The debt is void. The honor of Aldrich Ashcroft is restored. The war between Frostborn and Ashcroft is ended. Relief swept through the clearing like a physical wave. Warriors on both sides lowered their weapons. Some embraced. Others simply sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the knowledge that they would not have to fight tomorrow. that they might survive to see another season. Dorian crossed to Bjorn, offered his hand. The Frostborn Alpha took it. The grip was firm, painful, a warrior's acknowledgement of respect. "Your grandfather was a good man." Dorian's voice was quiet. "My father honored him in the only way he could. Let that be enough." Bjorn nodded. Then his gaze shifted past Dorian. Ragnar stood at the edge of the clearing, his face carved from stone, and Dorian felt it, through all the relief and celebration, a spike of wrongness, of danger. Ragnar's hand was on his sword. His eyes were cold, calculating, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the clearing with terrible finality. "This is weakness. This peace built on lies and sentiment, this alliance with our enemies, this king who makes decisions with his heart instead of his head. I will not serve it, will not watch Stormreach fall because its king is ruled by a woman and a bond." He drew his blade, not toward Dorian, toward Alara. The intention was clear. Remove her. Remove the source of the compromise. Force Dorian back to the cold, brutal king Ragnar had trained him to be. Dorian moved, not with thought, but with pure instinct. He was between Ragnar and Alara in half a heartbeat, his own blade drawn, his eyes no longer gold, but white. The full force of his alpha will radiated outward, a pressure that brought every wolf in the clearing to their knees. Everyone except Ragnar. The old warrior stood, weathered the storm of his king's fury, and smiled. "There you are. The beast. The thing I trained. I was beginning to think she had tamed you completely." Ragnar's blade came up in a guard position. "Let us see if you remember how to fight without her to protect." "No!" Alara's voice was raw with horror. "Dorian, do not do this. He is trying to force you to kill him, to make you into the monster he always wanted you to be." Dorian heard her, understood her, but Ragnar had crossed the line, had threatened his mate, had revealed himself as the true source of poison in the camp, and the wolf would not let that stand. He attacked, not with strategy, not with the controlled discipline Ragnar had taught him, but with the full primal fury of an alpha defending what was his. The two warriors collided in a clash of steel and fury. Ragnar was older, should have been slower, but he had been preparing for this moment, had been preparing since the moment Alara walked into camp. His blade moved with precision, exploiting every opening, every moment when Dorian let rage override technique. They fought across the clearing, traded blows that would have killed lesser warriors. Blood flew, steel sang, and every wolf watched in horror as king and mentor tried to murder each other. Bjorn stood, his voice carrying, "Stop this, both of you, this is madness." But neither man listened. This was personal. This was the breaking of a bond older than the one Dorian shared with Alara, the trust between teacher and student, father figure and son. It had been corroded by Ragnar's belief that caring was weakness, that love was poison, that a king stood alone or did not stand at all. Dorian landed a blow that opened Ragnar's shoulder. The old warrior staggered but did not fall. His response was a thrust that caught Dorian's side, driving deep. Pain exploded, blood flowed hot, and through the bond, Alara felt it, screamed. The sound cut through Dorian's rage, brought him back to himself. He saw Ragnar preparing a killing blow, saw the calculation in his mentor's eyes. This was the moment. Kill the king, claim it was mercy, rule through a puppet successor, restore the old ways. Dorian moved, not away from the blade but into it, used his body to close distance, got inside Ragnar's guard, and drove his own blade up under the ribs into the heart. Ragnar's eyes went wide, blood bubbled at his lips. He dropped his sword, gripped Dorian's shoulders, and for just a moment the coldness left his face. He looked almost sad. "I made you strong," the words were a whisper, "but she made you weak, and the weak do not survive. You made me alone." Dorian's voice broke, "and she made me human. You are wrong, old friend. The weak do not survive, but neither do the isolated. We survive together, or we do not survive at all." Ragnar slumped forward. Dorian caught him, lowered him to the ground, held the man who had taught him to fight, to lead, to be a king. Held him as the light left his eyes, and the breathing stopped, and the last of the old ways died in his arms. The clearing was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They had just watched a king kill his mentor, watched the symbolic death of one kind of rule and the birth of another. Alara crossed to Dorian, fell to her knees beside him. She did not speak, did not try to comfort with empty words. She just placed her hand on his back and let him feel her presence, let him know he was not alone. Bjorn approached slowly. His voice was quiet.
He gave you no choice.
Dorian looked up at the Frostborn Alpha. His face was wet. He did not remember when he had started crying. I know, but that does not make it easier. He was wrong about everything, but he was also the closest thing to a father I have had since Aldrich died. And I just killed him. Then honor his memory by being the king he could not teach you to be. Bjorn extended his hand. Be the king who rules through strength and compassion, who stands with his mate instead of above his people. Be the king who makes peace instead of war. Dorian took the hand, let himself be pulled to his feet. Let Elara support him as his wound bled and his heart broke, and his entire understanding of strength reformed itself. They buried Ragnar at sunset, gave him warrior's honors despite his betrayal. Because whatever he had become at the end, he had once been a good man, a loyal servant, a believer in a way of ruling that was no longer sustainable. Dorian stood at the grave, Elara beside him, and spoke words for the assembled warriors. Ragnar Blackthorn taught me to be strong, to be disciplined, to be a king. He was wrong about many things, but he was right that leadership requires sacrifice. I sacrifice the easy path, the path where I rule alone and trust no one. I choose instead to rule with partnership, to trust my mate, to build a kingdom where strength comes from connection instead of isolation. That is my promise to you, to him, to everyone who has died in this war. The warriors dispersed slowly, some to celebrate the peace, some to mourn their own losses, some simply to process the fact that they had survived and would not have to fight tomorrow. Bjorn approached Dorian one last time before he left. My warriors return north. We will send envoys in spring to formalize the peace. He clasped Dorian's shoulder once, held his gaze for a moment that carried the weight of understanding, then walked away. The Frostborn disappeared into the trees, heading north toward home. 6 weeks later, winter had come in full. Snow covered the war camp that was slowly transforming back into the capital. Warriors returned to their families, wounds healed, the dead were mourned and honored, and in the center of it all, a king learned to rule in a way no one had taught him. Mira Nightshade had been promoted to commander of scouts, the position Ragnar had held before his betrayal. She wore the rank without sentiment, understanding that service continued regardless of who had fallen. It was, Dorian thought, exactly the kind of pragmatic honor the new kingdom needed. Dorian stood on a balcony overlooking the kingdom, Elara beside him. She wore furs now, proper clothing instead of borrowed armor. She had been officially recognized as Aldrich's daughter, given title and land and a place in the court. But more importantly, she had been claimed publicly as the king's mate. The bond that should have destroyed them had instead become the foundation of a new kind of strength. Do you regret it? Elara's voice was quiet. Everything that happened. Everything you lost. Dorian considered this question. He had lost his mentor, his certainty, the clear lines between strength and weakness that had guided his entire life. He bore new scars, a wound in his side that would ache every winter, a limp that would never fully heal. But he had gained something too, partnership, peace, the knowledge that he did not have to carry every burden alone. No. His arm wrapped around her, pulled her close. I regret the cost, the deaths, Ragnar's betrayal. But I do not regret you, do not regret choosing connection over isolation. Elara leaned into him. Through the bond, he could feel her contentment, her relief, her own scars from the memory ritual that would never fully fade. They were both marked by what they had survived, both changed. A messenger approached, bowed. My king, the council awaits. There are matters of state that require your attention. Dorian nodded, looked at Elara. Ready to stand with me again? She smiled, always. They walked together through the corridors of power. Not king and subject, not protector and protected, but partners, equals in the ways that mattered. And behind them, in the snow-covered kingdom, a new future was being written, one where strength came not from standing alone, but from choosing who to stand beside. The story did not end with perfect happiness. There were still challenges, still enemies in the south who watched and plotted, still those in the kingdom who believed the old ways were better, still nights when Dorian woke from nightmares of all the ways he could lose her. But they faced it together. And in that simple revolutionary choice, They found something that all the power and isolation in the world could never provide. They found home. Years later, when scholars wrote of King Dorian Ashcroft's reign, they spoke of the peace he forged with the Frostborn, of the way he transformed Stormreach from a kingdom of warriors into a kingdom of wisdom, of the reforms that gave half-bloods and dormant bloodlines rights and recognition. But those closest to him knew the truth. The real transformation had not been political. It had been personal. He had learned that the strongest kings were not those who never broke, but those who broke and chose to heal, who admitted vulnerability and found it was not weakness, but courage. And beside him, every step, was Alara Thornwick, the daughter who should never have existed, the mate who should have been impossible. The woman who walked into a war and taught a king that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone stand beside you. On a winter night, in a kingdom at peace, they stood together on that same balcony. Snow fell softly. The stars were bright, and in the comfortable silence between them, the bond hummed with contentment. "This is enough," Dorian's voice was quiet. "This moment, this peace, you." Alara turned to look at him, saw the scars that marked him, saw the strength that had been earned through suffering, saw the man who had chosen love over loneliness and had been rewarded with a kingdom that finally felt like home. "It is more than enough." She stood on her toes, kissed him softly. "It is everything." And in that moment, in that small gesture of affection between two souls who had found each other against all odds, the true meaning of strength was written, not in the victories, not in the battles won or the enemies defeated, but in the simple, profound act of choosing to be vulnerable with another person, of trusting that together you could face whatever darkness waited in the future. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the promise of harder winters ahead. But Dorian did not flinch, did not turn away. He stood with Alara, looking out over their kingdom, and knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it the way they had faced everything else. Together. And that was enough.